Good evening, everyone. This is the Wolfeboro Planning Board meeting for Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. I'm Doug Breskin, the chairperson. To my left is Steve Webster, the co-chair, or vice chair, rather, Vaughn Dugan, Peter Goodwin, Roger Murray, Kathy Barnard, Jane Nielsen, Brad Harriman, and Julie Jacobs. The first hearing we have this evening is for Lifetime Green Homes at 15 Willow Street, tax map 20417, case 2024-02, a conditional use permit for accessory dwelling unit. Site visit was held this evening at 6:30 p.m.
You want me to?
And Kathy took some notes and attendance.
At the field trip began at 6:30, went until 6:45. Brad Harriman was there, Roger Murray, Steve Webster, Doug, Julie Jacobs, and myself, as well as several neighbors, and also Joanne was there for Brian Clifford, who was one of the abutters. Thank you.
Did you mention Roger's name?
Yes, Roger.
I missed that. Thank you. So for a brief discussion and introduction, before we start, I'd like to point out that this is a hearing for the accessory dwelling unit. I've heard some comments over the past week with concern about the wetlands and the main structure, but I'd like to point out that this is for the accessory dwelling unit that we're hearing tonight, not for the main unit. Mr. Brehm, if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to probably take this off, so
Sure.
move over to the map. As you all know by now, my name is Jeffrey Brehm. I'm with Meisner Rem Corporation. I'm the owner and engineer of the property at 15 Willow Street, which is lot 17 on map 204. It's a 2-acre parcel of land. I think you all know it. It's the end of Willow Street in the Wolfeboro Falls General Business District. I'll answer the first question you may have first, and then we'll go on to what we're proposing. I had seen you a few times over the last 6 to 8 months for various plans. This plan will supersede them. So the first thing is those plans have been shelved. I was asked earlier, how come I haven't gone to the Board of Appeals yet? And that's because I took the last meeting pretty tough, and then I reevaluated my whole situation, my wife and I. As you know, I said this before, this is where we want to retire and move to, and that's the primary objective, and the secondary objective was potentially to develop the property, and that's where the 6 units came from. As we're getting prices and so forth, you don't need to know my personal issues, but there was costs that were getting a lot higher, as well as I just basically decided maybe I shouldn't get involved in a big project like that as I head towards retirement. So we're changing the focus, and this is going to be our primary residence. That's shown here in blue, and then we're seeking tonight, just like you said, Mr. Chairman, it's just a use question to get approved for a conditional use permit for an accessory dwelling unit next door. So on the plan, the blue here is the principal building, the primary building. That's where we will be living, and the accessory dwelling unit is in black. And I'm going to go look at my papers, so I'm going to leave the plan for a minute and give you the required statistics. So you have the full application. You can still hear me? You have the full application there. There's a series of questions that I've filled out and a checklist. The application has the owner and then the checklist. So we submitted to you these checklists, which included a review of the ordinance, submit the floor plan, which I'll show you in a minute, renderings or similar structures, copy of the attached application, 10 copies, on a butters list. If the town isn't a butter, I don't have to mail you a list. You are in a butter. Birch Falls Path is owned by the town to the south. And then some envelopes and so forth, which we provided. Including the town, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 abutters. Actually 4, one is a double abutter. And then we gave you the plot plan, which you see, and then I'm going to go back to the map and talk to you about the proposed ADU. So now this is a blow-up of the first floor of the building. Now we debated first floor, and it's labeled as first floor. And the front doors are on the first floor, so I think we've got this covered. This is the first floor. It's the floor that you walk into. Front door for this one is here. The front door for this one is off to the side. That's a requirement in your ADU regulations, as you know. And the other major requirement is that it be no more than 30% of the primary building, and the square footage factors are the single-family building measures out at 5,433 square feet, and the ADU is 1,503 square feet, and that's 27.7%, so we meet that threshold. This building will be, you enter on the, like I said, the first floor, and then you go to a lower level for building, and upper level over the garage. That's the end of that unit. The line is right here between the primary unit and the ADU. And the ADU unit, you enter the first floor, and there's a second floor for 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Pretty basic plan. And for similars, this is the concept. If you haven't seen that. So the primary building is kind of a log house, lake house kind of a look, lodge look. And so you see that's a 1-story building with a couple of dormers and gables and so forth with an angle, similar to what we're building here. And this is an ADU unit, very similar. You can see that the textures of the wood would be the same. You know, we're looking for the browns and the earth tones, some stonework here and there. That's not subject to review, necessarily the architectural styles. The main thing you've got to do is, that's before you, is to issue, requested a conditional use permit for using this property with an ADU. I think that's it. I'm not going to belabor the point, and you'll probably have some questions, and I concur with you as far as the wetland work, and it does not require a site plan and so forth. I just want to check to make sure that I hit all the items on the ADU requirements. And I think I did. If I didn't, I'm sure somebody's going to ask me. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right.
In addition to 175-57-1, this is a conditional permit, so you also have to satisfy everything in 175-215. And that talks about the adequate usable space, open space, which there is, adequate access. I think you need to talk more about that. Absence of environmental constraints, and we've got a memo here from the Conservation Commission that raises some issues that I really think need to be addressed. We also have to look at neighborhood impact and no undue nuisance to the pedestrian or vehicular traffic. So we need to know how you're going to be crossing the path and things of that nature.
Sure. I'll answer the first question last, or the first statement last. Whoops, sorry. Which is the connectivity between the 2 buildings. And I've highlighted the door, this yellow door here. So that's the door that connects the ADU unit to the primary building unit. Now, as far as access and parking, thank you. The access, as we talked about at the field visit, well, the site visit, Willow Street ends approximately here, right there. And this piece of land is an easement that's owned by the abutter to the property, Mr. Smithwick, Michael Smithwick, who's here. There's an easement for access and utilities. We go through that easement and onto the property. The property has a 3-car garage and 3 parking spots behind it for the primary residence, total of 6 spots, and 2 spots outdoor off-street parking for the ADU. As far as the wetlands and all that, that's not the subject of this. We've shown wetlands. I just got...
But it is, because I mean, this is part of that single-family house, and so, I mean, we need to address the Conservation Commission's issues here.
Say that again? Lost.
Do you have this?
I just got that about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, okay.
As I
All
walked
right,
in
well,
the-
we
in the
did
building.
too. But it says it appears as though part of the driveway is going to be constructed within the 30-foot wetland setback and maybe the 25-foot buffer, as well as it's hard to gauge precisely with the setbacks and buffer. But we need accurate measurements. So that's...
So for the public's benefit who don't have this plan in front of them, on the plan that we were provided, the wetland buffer and the wetland setback are shown at the southwest corner of the parking area, and at which point the drawing of those lines ends. And then across the southern edge of the parking area, there's no clear indication as to where the wetland setback or wetland buffer occurs.
Could you turn that a little so members of the public can see it?
Sure. Do my best. Now I'm behind Tavis, but... So what happens is the wetland comes along and then hits the existing gravel area. And where it hits the existing gravel area, that's a disturbed area. And there's no buffer, no 25-foot, no 30-foot in the disturbed areas. So that's what we've shown. And then with that 25-foot, 30-foot buffer, we are not doing any work all along the entire perimeter. There's no work being done. I don't know why I just got this letter, but the answer to my letter is we are not disturbing the buffer.
So there's a fairly heavy dashed gray line that indicates the perimeter of the gravel on the plan.
That's existing gravel.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true. And,
Yeah.
and the wetland line goes over that. I see that. I don't know. I didn't do the wetland. I didn't make the gravel. Maybe over the years the wetland has grown up in the gravel. But I'm not doing anything in that area anyway. So, but to me, I'm going to guess, because like I said, I didn't do the wetland, and I hired a consultant to do that, and it's already been looked at by the town. My guess is that the gravel was there, and over the intervening 10 years, 20 years, the wetlands have popped up. When the gravel was placed there were no wetland laws, and they probably filled the wetland. And I'm not doing any work in that area whatsoever.
Any other questions from the board?
Are you going to be doing any blasting?
There will be pounding and blasting at some point, yes. There's, as you know, there's ledge throughout the property. I said on the site walk, and I'll repeat it again, I'm going to raise the building, the existing grade a few feet, so I can minimize that as much as possible. Different from the other plan, which I was doing the opposite. I was going into the ground. I want to avoid that as much as everybody. So I've raised the building a couple feet at its highest point so that I could keep that blasting to a minimum.
Where are the water and sewer hookups? Do they come to the property?
Water is on the other side of Center Street, and it's on Willow Street, and sewer is as well. So we just got to extend it down to Willow Street.
Do you have the easements required in order to do that?
Willow Street's a public way. I've already talked to DPW. We've already gone over it. We've already submitted them the sewer plans from the pump company months ago, many months ago.
But you're going to be digging up Center Street?
Willow Street, not Center Street, just Willow Street. Both of them are stubbed onto Willow Street.
They're both on the Willow Street side? Okay.
Correct.
Will there be provisions for just stop vehicles coming onto the path so somebody won't get hit by someone going in and out of the premises?
Well, last time, I think we had agreed to put a stop sign on our property.
Okay.
And I have no problem with that.
Thank you.
So I wonder about the conditional use permit criteria. You know, you must have an argument for each one of them. I don't think we've heard it.
I'm sorry,
There's-
this is the worst sound room I've ever
The
heard.
conditional use permit
Yes.
has criteria that you have to meet. So there are 5 criteria, I think.
Yep.
Tabs. So could you explain how you're meeting each of those?
This is under 175-57-1E that we're looking at. There are 6 criteria, I think.
Sorry.
That's okay. A maximum of one accessory dwelling unit per single-family dwelling unit is permitted. I'm only doing
So
one.
no, I'm talking about the special.
Yeah, she's talking about
That's
175, 215.
Yeah.
You have that I could borrow?
Yep.
Sure, it's here.
Yeah, I just need it back when you're done.
You got it. Okay, 175-215, reviews for conditions of grant of approval. Adequate usable space, site suitability. Well, I don't know if they mean usable space on the site, but there's 2 acres on the site. If there's adequate usable space for the ADU, it's got 3 bedrooms, a family room, and a kitchen. It's large enough for a family to live in. I don't understand what that means. Adequate access. The access is provided, as I mentioned. Absence of environmental constraints. There are no floodplain. Well, there's floodplain out here in the lake, but we're not working in it. There's no steep slopes. There is ledge, as I said, but we'll be blasting that. Immediate neighborhood impact. Proposal maintains the aesthetic continuity for the primary dwelling unit as a single-family dwelling. The ADU entry door is not visible to the public way. Public way is Willow Street. The door is facing west. Willow Street is to the south. Undue noise, undue nuisance, or serious hazard to pedestrian or vehicular traffic, including the location and design of access ways and off-street parking. Like I said, we are providing off-street parking. The access ways is quite a bit off of Willow Street and quite a bit off of Bridge Falls Path, so there wouldn't be anybody parking on the pathway and interfering with pedestrian safety. I will put a stop sign there at the end as a condition. That's 3. Does it continue? That's it. The next page is the appendix, so that's it.
So you note that there is wetlands delineation underneath the gravel area?
Yes, we just talked about that.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Going further. So we know that there is wetlands underneath there, and we know that there's a 30-foot setback from wetlands, and I see that you've got a driveway on it. It seems clear to me that you could navigate around that setback line and still get to the garage doors and the parking spaces.
I have done that. So the 30-foot line is right here.
Yeah.
I'm tracing it, and it ends right there.
Well, it would go. Follow 30 foot.
No, it doesn't. Your regulations clearly state if it's a developed land, there's no buffer zone. It's clear. I don't know why that we keep talking about this. It's
Well,
very,
we have-
very clear. So it ends right at the edge of the gravel.
So we have wetlands delineated by, I presume, a viable wetland scientist, that it's
Correct.
underneath that area.
Right.
So clearly, there is an impact.
This is a gravel area that's been there for decades. I didn't build this gravel area.
I don't define how you define wetlands either.
Right. But there's only a setback when it's not a disturbed area. This whole area has been disturbed. It's been cleared and graded and graveled prior to my ownership of it. Once you get to that, that does not count as setback. A buffer zone, serious. That's it.
Well,
I've never
under
had
the-
that experience.
Well, that's what's written down in the regulations.
Well, what's written down in the ordinance is under the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District 175-7C, buffers and a setback shall not apply if the wetland is one of the following types. 1, constructed vegetative swale, roadside ditch, or driveway ditch. 2, sedimentation, detention, or retention basin. Or 3, an excavated agricultural irrigation or fire pond. And I'm not sure that exception would apply to this, and that your buffer and setback seem to show a very faint line wandering into the parking area and then out again.
That's the contour line, not a buffer setback line.
There's a missing buffer setback to the wetlands.
Regardless, that's not what we're here for.
Oh, it's one of the
We're here for a use
criteria.
permit.
That's part of the criteria. One of the 5 criteria you just read.
Is that we're not going to impact the environmental issue. Right, I'm not doing any work in the actual wetland, period. No work in the shoreline, no work in the wetland. This is just a use permit.
So in my opinion, you could accomplish both. Getting a driveway in there roughly in the area that you're proposing and not get within 30 feet of the newly delineated wetland.
I may be able to do that, but this plan does not require that. It's up to this board in a separate permit anyway, and I could come back to that in the future.
Well,
for conditional use
we
permit.
did receive this a memo from the Conservation Commission, so
Yes, today.
that's what we're trying
You know
to
that the date of
address.
the application, just so you know.
And it is specifically mentioned in the conditional use permit of 215, 175-215.
Something to point out for the board is section 175.7A1. The minimum wetlands buffer, which is more restrictive than a setback, shall consist of undisturbed land in accordance with the following requirements. The only exception would be for driveway crossings. So the exception to this buffer setback question is for driveways. Now, driveway is not clearly defined. Conservation Commission suggested it's not a driveway, it's a vast parking area or something to that extreme.
Well, it certainly
doesn't-
looks like a parking area.
This is okay, let's be clear. This is the garage. You park in front of the garage. I said there's 3 parking spaces inside, 3 parking spaces outside. The rest of it is an access way. I'm not parking on this land. I'm not parking on my neighbor's land. That's all the driveway. All this is the driveway to get to those 3 spaces. And you can't call it a parkway because the parking part of it is not where the driveway is.
So one avenue that the board could suggest would be that the applicant submit a special use permit to address the wetland buffer and setback if the board believes that the gravel area, as a gravel area, still constitutes a wetland setback and a buffer. The other would be to approve it with the condition the applicant revise the driveway to avoid the setback and buffer area.
I think it could also be interpreted to say that the southernmost portion of the paved area shown on this is the driveway, and then the area directly in front of the garages would be for parking.
Lots of ways to split the
Yeah.
coin. The real question is, and perhaps not for this application, but for the board to think about, in an area that at some point had a wetland delineation, but there's now no wetland. I think you all saw it today. There is no wetland in the area in question. It's all gravel compacted area. Is the intent of the wetland conservation overlay to still include that area that was once wetland?
So who delineated this wetland that we're looking at?
I would have
Lou
to ask.
Curley used to be from BSC when he did this, Boston Survey Consultants. Prior to that, he was with Gove Environmental.
So there's no current wetland delineation, it's an old,
That is current. That was a year ago or so, yes.
a year ago.
That's what I said. I believe, and I'm not sure, I'm not the wetland delineator, I believe that the wetland can grow in gravel, obviously, over time, Because what you need with wetland is 14 inches to groundwater generally. So he digs down, he sees the wetland plants growing, he digs down, he sees 14 inches to water, or evidence of that, and he's going to call it a wetland, even though it was gravelled over, and he sees the gravel on the surface. That's what I think that is. What I'm saying is it was, regardless of that, it was previously disturbed as something, whether it was a driveway or parkway, doesn't matter, but my driveway is going next to it.
So under 175.7, buffers and setbacks from wetlands, so 175.7A2, a wetlands buffer is the land area from the edge of delineated wetlands to the buffer line consisting of ungraded and undisturbed land. The wetlands buffer shall consist of ungraded and undisturbed land and no building structures or improved land unless otherwise allowed by the overlay district. So in this particular case, it's my opinion that it is graded and disturbed land and it's not proposing a structure.
That's what I've...
So it really
Well
doesn't,
said. Thank
it
you,
doesn't
Tom.
meet the definition of a buffer.
And I will say to the board, if I had received this sometime between April 15th when I applied and tonight, I would have been better prepared to answer the question that you're asking. But I just got this 10 minutes ago.
Everybody did, you're not alone.
Right. And it's been submitted since April, middle of April.
But we saw the entire application last Friday at the earliest, so when you submitted it does not impact when we saw it and when we could start looking at it. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I don't believe these buildings meet the setback requirement under the ordinance. You do so show a side setback, but the front setback does not satisfy the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And I would suggest you look at going to the Board of Adjustment to resolve that.
Can you elaborate?
So
It's not within a minimum of 10 feet or a maximum of 20 feet.
That's the front yard setback in this zone.
The front setback is the Bridge Falls path as you showed it on your earlier plan. Setbacks are not something that float around. You can move around the property at your convenience.
Well, that's it. I've been talking to the building department, and that's what they've said that I should do.
well, I mean, I think
It's a building department zoning enforcement officer decision.
you could argue it is the frontage on the street.
But there's not a street.
Well, it's a right-of-way.
Well, Willow Street does extend along the east property line, so that would be a front.
Then why was this shown as the frontage on front setback measured from the Bridge Falls path on an earlier application? And my follow-up is, given that section 175, 182, and 183 says that in interpreting the zoning ordinance, the Director of Planning and Development and the Codes Officer are supposed to use the most restrictive or most conservative interpretation. And I don't see how this possibly could fall under that.
For what? For
In interpreting the zoning ordinance.
what section?
What section of what?
The zoning ordinance.
Section, it's the provisions governing the Wolfeboro Falls Business District. It would be section 175, 115. Setback, front yard, 10 feet minimum, 20 feet maximum.
Okay. On the east property line, the building is shown at 19 feet.
But that is the side setback.
That is not the
Side
determined.
boundary, that's not the front boundary.
was told,
It
sir.
abuts the neighbor.
I think that the last plan might have been an error because it was to the path, the Bridge Falls path. You had that structure connecting. I would presume that the street is the front, generally. So
It was actually presented to this board as an option with guidance from Planning Board Council as to whether or not Bridge Falls Path could be considered a street given its origins as a railroad. And the board had the discussion that it could be either or, the east or south property line.
That's my recollection, too.
All right, I have one last point, and that is that under the checklist, it says the applicant should submit architectural renderings or elevations of the structure as it will appear when the ADU is constructed. And I don't believe, and also under the requirements for an accessory dwelling unit, under E2, the exterior alterations, enlargements, or extensions of the single-family dwelling are permitted in order to accommodate the accessory dwelling unit. However, no such change is permitted which would alter the appearance of the single-family dwelling to look like a duplex or any other multifamily structure. And again, under the conditional use permit, under 175-215B, immediate neighborhood impact, that the proposal maintains the aesthetic continuity for the primary dwelling unit as a single-family dwelling. And in this case, I think it doesn't or we don't have enough information to determine that that's the case.
What information am I not providing? I showed you the elevations of the typical buildings.
Okay, you look like you've got a detached structure and then a main structure.
Clearly, the plan and the elevations don't match.
Yep. I mean, if you gave us a completed structure with, well, as architectural renderings or elevations of the structure as it will appear when the ADU is constructed.
And what is it that you're looking for? Because here, I keep coming to these meetings, and you keep sending me back. I keep coming, you keep sending me back. I'm not going back.
Well, one of the reasons you keep coming back is because you keep submitting things that don't meet the requirements. When you came in on the 3rd of October with the plan, we told you you cannot have apartments on the first floor. We also told you needed a setback variance for the building. In January, you showed up with apartments on the first floor and no compliance with the setback. We then suggested you go to the Board of Adjustment. You decided not to. You came in with a duplex, which apparently didn't meet the requirements. That did not come before us. And now you've come in with this, and we're trying to address this.
You did not mention anything at the October meeting, so I take offense at that. I came in to discuss it. There was nothing about the first floor. Go read the tape.
No, you go read the minutes. That's exactly what the minutes say. And Tavis told you that, and he told you there couldn't be apartments on the first floor, and I told you you did not meet the setback requirement, you needed variance.
Right, and then we argued where the first floor was, but you didn't say you put a basement in the building.
Let's not go backwards.
Okay.
Let's not go backwards. As for this application, I see elevations that are clearly not the floor plan.
Yeah, show me exactly in the regulations where the elevations are required. I see it's on the checklist.
So we don't know.
Where in the regulations does it say that I have to provide architecturals? Because I couldn't find that.
You can't show pictures of like this and like that and expect us to decide whether or not the single-family dwelling looks like a duplex or a multi-family structure. I mean, obviously, it's two separate buildings. We don't have drawings of what the front looks like to decide that.
Tavis, is there something in the regulations that require elevations of the actual structure?
Section 175, 1E, criteria 2 require that it show no such changes permitted which would alter the appearance of the single-family dwelling to look like a duplex or any other multifamily structure, i.e. the house shall not look like it was designed to occupy more than one family. under section 175-215. B, as cited by Vaughan, the proposal maintains the aesthetic continuity for the primary dwelling unit as a single-family dwelling, and we don't have something that shows that.
We
Go ahead.
We have something that clearly shows two individual structures and words that say similar.
Right.
So we don't have enough information.
Could we include a condition that occurs?
No.
Well, no, because we haven't seen it.
Well, all I'm saying is, could we include a condition that both dwellings are similar in their construction, rather than, and similar to one of these which has been provided?
Well, 175-57.1E2 says, no change is permitted which would alter the appearance of the single-family dwelling. Well, there is no single-family dwelling to be altered. It continues to say, to look like a duplex. I don't know what a duplex looks like. We don't define what a duplex looks like. Or a multifamily structure. So just about any building can become a multifamily structure. It's unclear, to Mr. Brem's point, it's unclear what the ordinance is trying to make it look like. I would agree with the board that you have two images in front of you that are separate structures. And then presumably some, as proposed, some variant of those with a three-car garage in the middle of it would be the structure. I don't know if that meets what the board would determine to be a duplex look or not.
But we can't approve something we don't see. It has to be submitted.
But to Mr. Brem's point, it doesn't say you need full alterations unless that's how the board wants to interpret
It
it.
does
and
for
that's where
site
you
plan
are.
approval, clearly.
I mean, it doesn't
But we're
seem-
not here for site plan approval.
I mean, it doesn't seem that hard. You just come in with, something that shows the building, shows an an elevation.
The purpose is so that the front door, it says so that it doesn't look like a two-family building, a duplex with two front doors facing the front. I did that, and that's clearly been submitted. So what other things are you looking for? If I make it,
You can't.
what building would not approve it? How can I make a two-family building look like a multifamily building that's basically 1.5 stories tall? I can't. It's never going to look like a multifamily building. How's it going to look like a duplex? The only way would be two doors facing forward. I turned one of the doors.
Well, if it's that easy, then you should be able to do it with no problem.
I don't understand what I'm going to draw up, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so on the checklists and guidelines for applicants, which you went through because you have check marks,
Yeah?
it says submit the floor plan, which you did, great. Another check, submit architectural renderings or elevations of the structure as it will appear when the ADU is constructed. That is not this. You can't just write similar styles.
You're right. And I'm saying that this checklist, I don't know where it came from, but it did not come from the regulations. You just can't throw a checklist on and expect an applicant to do it. I gave you the similar styles in addition to what is required in the regulations.
Well, to me, that looks like separate dwellings.
As it does to me.
I was just trying to give you the imagery of the textures, of the colors, of these siding materials, the roofing materials, all those are similar.
The most important thing is that it doesn't look like multifamily structure. It looks like a house. It can have as many families as is allowed.
Right.
In this case, an ADU would allow another family. But it looks like two families.
I mean, all we're asking is that you
I know.
produce what you want to build.
As I said, I'm getting frustrated with the process because I try to follow the regulations and you are throwing checklists at me.
I'm throwing the ordinance at you. I mean, you're building a building, right? You have to have a plan for it.
And I will. I think Mr. Goodwin makes a good point. I could easily come back with an architecture after spending 25 grand and come to you with the building plans. No problem with that. But you want me to spend the 25 grand and ask whether I'm going to get an ADU. I think that's, for a site plan for a commercial development, that's great. And that's what I did when I was doing the multifamily. And I spent the 25 grand. No problem. That's gone. I'm trying to do this. I don't want to spend 25 grand to show you plans and you tell me, you don't meet this section, so we're not going to give you the ADU. I think that's just trying to be fair. I think this process is getting to be unfair, and I'd like to somehow figure out a way to get it fair, and I think Mr. Goodwin makes a good suggestion. Give me a conditional use permit. And I'll come back when I get the architecturals. I have no problem with that.
Well,
I really don't want to spend the money for the architecturals and have it be denied.
I'd also suggest that to the point that was made earlier about submitting architectural renderings or elevations of the structure, that's on a checklist and guidelines. It's not part of the ordinance, and it says guideline, so there should be some flexibility. From my perspective, I think that the renderings that were provided give an idea of what it would look like, substantially enough to give us guidance as to whether it conforms to the ordinances.
And just so you know, my nature is not to fight. So it's not that I don't want to do it, and I will do it. Okay, I'm not here saying no. I'm just saying it's not. I don't want to do it right now for the reasons of really spending another 25 grand to be wasted. That's the gosh darn truth. So
It is my opinion that these two images which we have seen were suggestions as to what the structure was going to look like, which doesn't say that each of those is a separate view of the ADU versus the main structure. So the idea is that if we put in a condition that all the structure looks similar, to me that would mean that there is continuity to the structure.
But you've got to go through the process no matter what. You're going to have to present those drawings for some decision to be made, and I guess we could rescind it, but I don't think that's the way things work.
Why do we rescind it?
Because it comes out looking like a house, a garage, and a separate house.
No, to me, these were produced as what the outside of the structure, which is the whole building, would look like.
It's not even close to accurate. There's no piece that sticks out here. There's no angled piece. It's not the same.
I was trying to just give you a style, that's all. And I will come back, and you don't have to rescind your approval. We could just keep hashing out the architectural until I meet your requirements. I have no problem with that either. I don't think you're going to have a problem with the look of the building when I finally get it done. And it will be continuity. It'll meet that. And I have no problem with it as a condition. And I'll come back in 2 or 3 months, and we'll have a hearing, and we'll advertise it and all that. I don't care about that. I just would like to get step 1 done.
I'd like to make a suggestion that maybe a rendering of this layout should be sufficient with the flavor of the design. And that can be done fairly reasonably. We do them, we're in the construction business, and we do design build, and most people understand a 3D view better than 2D. Builders, we can look at that and envision what it looks like, but most people like to see a rendering. That can be done fairly simply.
Right. You're assuming
Steve.
I'm not going to use the same architect
For a
that
lot
I've
less
used
than
all my life.
25
I'm going to
grand.
look
I
for
can
somebody
give
else.
you-
There's other
I'll give you
issues that
some
are
names.
related to that. So I've used the same architect, 2 architects my whole life. I'm not going to go with them for various reasons, mainly because they're from a different locale, and I want to go to a local architect. I haven't even searched the architect yet. I haven't even done that yet. So if you were to send me home, it'd be months before I came back here. I know that. And I'd rather not do that. I'll come back in months with the plan, but I'd like to have the ADU conditional use permit with a condition, if I can.
Steve, is it sufficient to have those renderings produced to the building department rather than back to the board? No. Tavis?
The board has previously had a subset of the board review the elevations with the ability to refer it back to the board if those appointed members did not believe it satisfied the regulation.
I'm sorry, Tavis, could you repeat that?
The board has previously had a subset of the planning board with similar conditions to what's being talked about, had a subset of board members review it for consistency with the regulation. Of course, the option is always, if there's a question, it would come back to the whole board. But where this board seems to have questions on wetlands, yes, no, that's something for you to decide, whether the setback buffer question still has to be addressed further or not. And the elevations, I would recommend the board continue to a date specific.
So, as some have suggested, we could provide an approval with a condition that the plans be submitted to, as Tavis suggested, a subset of the planning board for approval before moving forward with any work.
If the board is okay with that. That
Yes,
was a
I understand. I'm
different
just
board that put that in
clarifying
play.
it.
Yes.
We need to hear from the public.
Are there any more questions from the
I
board?
have one question.
Yeah.
I have one question about the parking lot and the driveway bit. Under the ADU, doesn't it say only that it has to supply one parking space for an ADU? In
Correct.
addition to all the rest of the stuff?
That's correct.
Aren't we only talking about the ADU and it's one parking space tonight? Not the whole parking area and the whole driveway going up to the road?
It's one additional parking space.
Yeah, it's 2 for the primary and 1 for the ADU.
Right, and we're only
But
talking about that
the
one,
ordinance
right?
is written as though someone is adding an ADU or converting part of a house to an ADU. The ordinance is not written clearly for somebody building a whole new structure that contains both.
Right, and we're trying to separate the two.
Well, in this case, you can't separate the two because an accessory dwelling unit has to be attached or contained within a single-family dwelling, so he needs the single-family dwelling in order to have the ADU. And I have no problem with you in both at the same time.
Right, so the interesting part about that comment is Mr. Brem could remove the ADU component of the structure, build everything that's on that plan, and then come into the board to convert the end of it to an ADU. It would probably be largely similar to the same structure. That was my point. The ordinance is written as though someone's taking an existing structure and converting part of it or putting an addition on to be an ADU. The ordinance is not clearly, or the regulations aren't clearly written for a new vacant lot.
But there's nothing, I don't think there's anything in there that would prevent someone from doing that.
Correct. But my reference was, it talks about enlargements or alterations to not look like a duplex, to not look like this. If the structure, that exact structure were built as a single-family home and the application were subsequently made to convert the east end to an ADU, the board would be looking at functionally the exact same thing, contemplating only the use permit component of it.
That's correct. That would be
But-
just paperwork at that point.
That really, because of the way it's separated and located, it really does not look like the continuation of a single-family dwelling.
I think it does.
We don't really,
It's just a
the
big
ordinance doesn't really
rambling
define what
home.
a single-family
Okay, but
duplex
we
or
haven't
multifamily
heard
look
from
like.
the public yet.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to
So
be.
if there are no further questions from the board, we'll open up the public session, the public comment section.
Have we accepted the application yet?
Application
I'm
is-
sorry, yes.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to accept the application as complete.
Second.
So Kathy has made a motion to accept the application as complete. Brad has seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We'll open up the public comment. Would anybody like to speak?
John Sandine, resident. I've looked at these plans on many occasions and commented regarding wetlands. And I'd like to start by questioning the public announcement of this public hearing. This is listed as tax map 204-17, and you keep referring to it as 15 Willow Street. I don't see how you can call it 15 Willow Street when it's 17 Willow Street.
That's what the tax card shows.
The tax card, obviously, there is another map, 204-15. How do you square that one away?
The street,
20415 is listed as Michael and Alyssa Smidick Willow Street.
Yes.
20417 is listed as 15 Willow Street.
most properties in town have a tax map number that has nothing to do with the
Okay.
street number.
Thank you.
In fact, if you could look yours up, you'll probably find the same.
Okay. I will withdraw that comment. I'd like to discuss this entire property. from the point of view of the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District 175-3 to 175-10.4. It clearly applies to 15 Willow Street. The ordinance says the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District is defined as those areas of the town of Wolfeboro which meet the definitions of wetlands, required buffers and setbacks in 175-10.4 as defined. And then it goes on to read, such determination shall be made by field inspections and testings conducted by a certified wetland scientist per New Hampshire DES Wetlands Bureau guidelines. That determination has been made, and it was conducted by Gary Flaherty, a wetland scientist, regarding this property. So he surveyed it, and all of this property falls under the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District Ordinance. Further, it says, all proposed development, removal of vegetation, and alteration of the land surface within the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District is subject to this article. 15 Willow Street property meets these definitions and is subject to the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District Ordinance. So while you're discussing a attached dwelling unit or auxiliary dwelling unit, you need to look at the entire property that is being used and is subject to these Wetlands Conservation Overlay District ordinances. And when I look at the layout, which I obtained a copy from the planning board, and it has a very dotted line that says limit of work. And if you look at it closely, you'll see that the limit of work abuts, it's not close, it abuts the building. Now, if you're a builder, you know you can't pour a foundation, you can't blast for a foundation, you can't do all those things without changing the grade, without encroaching on the wetlands buffer. And so I suggest to you that you also need to look very closely at where this building Unit 1 sits. And I believe that's what the Conservation Commission is also asking about. Why is this building, Unit 1, sitting squarely on what they call limit of work? And how can you have a limit of work that butts right up against the building? You have to have disturbed soil. You have to dig around the building to put in the foundations. You have to regrade the whole thing in order to, as was mentioned, to raise the building up. You have to regrade all of that. And if you're going to do blasting, in addition, that is going to disturb the wetlands. So I submit to you that you need to apply this wetlands ordinance to the Wetlands Overlay Ordinance to look at this property from an entire view. It's not just an accessory dwelling unit that you're looking at. You're looking at putting a single-family house encroaching on the wetlands. And if you go beyond and read the ordinance says that it's to this end, the construction of a single-family dwelling, including additions and replacement dwellings, shall be limited to a maximum allowed footprint of 1,800 square feet within the setback or buffer zone on the lot of less than 3 acres. And I submit to you that that is the case here, that this building is sitting clearly lots more than 1,800 square feet. And this ordinance requires a special exception based on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Suzanne Ryan, resident. What I'm about to ask is not to implicate that I'm for or against this proposal. I have the same question only about the road as I did before, only I'm going to couch it a little differently. We had from Mr. Ford in 2022 an estimate from the UNH survey as to the length of Willow Street. It goes beyond that. I'm not saying the road goes beyond the crossing. I'm saying the interpretation of what a road is. There's a state law that supersedes a lot of town law regarding roads. And it's a zoning state law that applies in all towns. Under RSA 671-41, no building permit can be issued, nor can any building be built unless the lot has access from one of 5 types of streets. It's a street up to the crossing. After that, at best, it's a Class 6 road. How do I know that? Because under state law, if the town doesn't maintain a portion of that road for 5 years or more, it's a Class 6 at best. However, we're dealing with easements and right-of-ways on those deeded properties. And I don't think it's been made clear how those easements and deeds and in the deeds and right-of-ways can be used. I believe that a portion of it was to a mill, not this site, but another site. I really think that more thought has to be given into how that property is going to be accessed. 674-41 applies to all lots, including those in older recorded subdivisions. Frontage. The statute refers to the street giving access to the lot. The lot must have actual frontage on one of the 5 types of street. An easement giving access to backlots over land of another will not meet the statutory requirement unless the easement itself is either for a public highway or shown on a plat. In 1995, reacting to the Billico case, the legislature enacted a second sentence in RSA 674-41-3. The purpose of paragraph 1, the street giving access to the lot means a street or way abutting the lot and upon which the lot has frontage. It does not include a street from which the sole access to the lot is via a private easement or a wider right-of-way unless such easement or right-of-way also meets the criteria set forth. Grandfathering. Some municipalities zoning ordinance grandfathered existing lots. However, such zoning clauses do not make an existing lot exempt from the state frontage requirement. The state frontage requirement takes precedent. Streets and driveways. A road is either some class of public highway or it's not. If it is not, then a lot frontage on the roadway does not qualify to build on under 674-41. Whether the roadway is collaterally referred to as a street or driveway doesn't matter with respect to the law. I know where Tavis is going to go on this with me, so I'm going to keep reading until I get to the rest of it. exception to RSA 674-41. The Board of Adjustments to grant an exception when a property owner wants to build on a lot that has no frontage on any class of highway and no frontage on any roadway approved by the planning board, which this doesn't. So where I'm going with this is that I wanted to give you the history about 674-41 and for you to review that some more, because there's an issue. Is it a Class 5? Is it an easement right-of-way? And what are those conditions spelled out in those easements and right-of-ways? Or does it fall under Wolfeboro's ordinance, 175-55-1? And interestingly enough, I've pulled out Hausman's work here, and in, I believe it was 2014, what I'm trying to say is a way to get from here to there, but there are sequential steps that must be followed. And I believe that there is somebody's going to have to determine with the help of an attorney, is this a Class 6? Is it an easement with a right-of-way, and what are those criteria? We know it's not a traveled road from the crossing to this gentleman's land. So we adopted, 175-55-1, and the statement of purpose is in accordance with RSA 674-41-2A. This section exempts, this is the part, the town, this is like a way around the state law with acceptable practices. It's almost like a variance. 674-41-2A. This section exempts from compliance with other provisions of 674-41 lots with no frontage and with deeded rights to a private way, and lots with frontage only on a private way not shown on this plat approved by the planning board. RSA 674-41 applies to all lots with frontage on access to a Class 6 road and lots that do not comply. By authority of 674-41-2A, lots compliant with the area requirements of the district and with no frontage or with frontage only on a private way not shown on an approved plat prior to the issuance of a building permit. This is where I'm going, is if this thing gets approved, to put a condition precedent. Prior to the issuance of a building permit, an owner of a lot exempt under this section must obtain a special exception. Lots eligible for relief under this section shall be deemed ineligible for subdivision under the lot's current configuration. The owners of any lot exempt under this section must obtain a special exception prior to the issuance of a building permit for that lot. Applications for special exception under this section may be approved by the Zoning Board of Adjustment only if all of the following, and then there's a big list of criteria. And a statement of a purpose is in accordance with 674-41. This article exempts, and I've already read that. And so that's what we've adopted to find a palatable way around 674-41. The statute on 674-41 statute concerned that if there is frontage on a Class 5 road, the question is not how much frontage, or not the amount of frontage. It's governed by your local zoning ordinance, and I think it's 150 feet frontage on our zoning ordinance in that district. You could check me on that. And we have, the Board of Selectmen has in the last couple of years, I believe, adopted a comprehensive Class 6 mechanism by which they can, under certain circumstances, approve a building permit, which is through you to them. But there's also, as I say, the special exception criteria for which we have used, and I don't know if I have it with me, but I do. It's right here. We not too long ago had a case. Here it is. Well, maybe it's in 22, I think it was. And this was from Mr. Austin, and it was relevant to a case regarding this 175-55-1, where the applicant had an easement or a right-of-way, and it wasn't a Class 6 road. And the applicant came before us. I believe they ended up getting approval. So it's not a simple, is it a classic road, is it a right-of-way? Once that's determined, then you have to decide which, or somebody has to decide which vehicle they're going to take. If it's a Class 6 road, it goes through the selectmen with their process. If it's an easement right-of-way situation, then it goes through, I believe, 175-55-1. And the statement of purpose of that is this section exempts from compliance with, I'm reading out of the town ordinance, other provisions of 674-41, lots with no frontage, and with deeded right-of-way to private way and lots with frontage only on a private way, not shown on a subdivision, and by authority, lots compliant with this area requirements and with no frontage exempt, and then they go through this process under our town ordinance. So it's not, I wish I could describe it better and more concise, but it's not a simple matter. It's a matter that's going to take more thought and depth of investigation. And if you do approve this, I would ask that it be condition precedent, the building permit not be issued until the issue is settled of what kind of road, is it a right-of-way, is it an easement, and then what steps the applicant must take to get there. As I say, he can get there from here, but he has to go through some steps.
Thank you, Suzanne.
For your time.
Tavis?
674-41-1B2, a street on a subdivision plat approved by the planning board. That is how Willow Street became a street. It can't be a Class 6 because to be a Class 6, it first has to be a Class 5 and then discontinued. But one of the criteria under 674-41 that allows it to be accessed is a street on a subdivision plat approved by the planning board, which we've come across several times. So 674-41 1B2 is a street on a subdivision plat. And for those curious about the actual subdivision plat, that would be something the planning board signed July 6, 1993, that shows Willow Street as depicted on the plan that you see tonight.
Thank you.
.674 is more in depth than just a subdivision plat.
Tavis, is it?
Just reading what the statute says.
I understand. My question is this lot has frontage, but the driveway, as shown here, does not pass across that frontage.
No, that's the fun part of this particular lot. The frontage actually touches the southeast corner, so it actually touches what would be the trail side and the Willow Street side simultaneously in a spot that's approximately 6.72 feet long.
Right.
That's why the question came originally to the board, which is the front. Planning Board Council believed it could be considered as a corner lot. Yes, previous plans utilized the trail for proximity in conformance with the front yard setback. This one is consistent with the Willow Street side being determined to be the front. The regulations also speak, if you go to section 175 and look under lot line For a corner lot, so lot line A, lot front, the front property line shall be determined as follows. 1, corner lot, for the purposes of building setbacks, all lot lines abutting a street shall be treated as front setbacks. That was the question about the trail versus the road. With all other lines set as side setbacks, where such front property line is not obviously evident, the zoning administrator shall determine the front property line. So that's how well more than 30 days ago it was determined that the front could be either, as discussed with the planning board.
Thank you. Any further public comment?
Hi, Audrey Klein, resident. I'll copy what Suzanne said. I don't have the answer to any of these questions. Some of this conversation has brought up questions, so I'm not either for or not for this project. I just think there's some interesting situations. First of all, I guess I'm going to talk about the choice of the setback, front setback, side setback. So I think the process for that is for the zoning administrator to make a determination which one is which in writing. I don't think this application necessarily is a determination by the zoning administrator. So I think that needs to be in writing, that this is being called the front setback. And then you start looking at whether the front of the building, the primary building, is what is intended to be between 10 and 20 feet, or does the zoning mean any structure that's built on a lot needs to start there? So if you had a residential lot, are they saying that you can just put the corner of your garage in front and the house way behind? Is that what the intent of that 10 and 20 feet really means? Also, interestingly, in the zone, if you go to the notes below, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Note number 4 is not called out on any of the lines in the zone. Like usually there's you're allowed to have business services, and there's a little 1 and 2, so you have to go down and look at the notes 1 and 2. Note 4 is not listed anywhere on there, and I don't know why, but it says garages shall be located to the side or rear of the principal dwelling unit. Clearly, the principal dwelling unit is not the one that's within the setback, so I think that's an interesting question of whether it intends the principal dwelling unit or the principal building on the lot to be in that setback, or any other structure that happens to be built needs to be in that setback. But then, how does this note number 4 apply? Does it apply? Is there a missing notation someplace in the translation between the adopted ordinance and what I see online? I don't know the answer to that. But I think it would make sense if they're calling out for a 10 to 20 setback in the front setback, that the intent may have been that the principal building would be there and that the parking note number 4 would actually apply. I don't know the answer to that. It's just a question.
Any further public comment?
Hi, Luke Freudenberg, 68 Center Street. I think I'm the closest single-family residence, not in a butter, but in distance to the project. And I wanted to come out and say that I support the ADU. I think it's, I'm hoping that, that maybe House Bill 1291 will be signed by the Senate and go into law, and it'll pretty much make these meetings irrelevant when it comes to ADUs. But the property for my entire lifetime and when I bought 68 Center Street has been an attractive nuisance, as many of you know. Police have been called there many times over the years. It was about 8 years ago that I found a needle dump out behind my property where people were, shooting up heroin and living in a tent and making meth and Gatorade bottles. So the property has been an attractive nuisance. It's gone through various different applications over the years on what could be done there. And I think a single-family residence with a ADU is really a no-brainer, and I hope it gets approved. So thank you for your time.
Any further public comment? All right, I'll close the public comment, and it's up to deliberation amongst the board. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Well, my primary thought is that if we push it down the road, say, okay, you can have an ADU, but we want to look at it, so you'll have to do these drawings for us to approve it, you'll have to do the drawings anyway. So
You just closed the hearing, so you really can't
Oh, I'm
continue
sorry.
it unless
Okay.
you reopen it.
Sorry.
Just procedural steps.
Why were her comments?
Question, is there a building permit application for the rest of the building? Or are we doing the ADU first, and then the rest of it will materialize later if it passes?
Can't have an ADU without a primary, so what they're
Right, so
showing
it'd
is
be
a
built all at
vacant
the same
lot going
time.
to one structure that would have both.
Right, but I'm saying, is this the first bit of paperwork to step up, or is the other part of the building and everything stuff that we didn't see and that's already in process? The main building?
Nothing's processed.
This is the first bit.
So to the discussion that we had earlier, this is, I guess, a little bit of an unusual order in that, as Tavis had pointed out, the ADU regulation was initially drafted to add a structure to an existing structure rather than have both built at the same time.
So in reality, this kind of has to go through before you can actually do the rest of the plans, is the way I'm reading it.
And I believe Mr. Brem's concern was that he didn't want to invest a significant amount of money in developing the plans without knowing whether or not he'd be approved for the ADU.
Is it therefore useful for us to think about this as two separate projects? As in, would we approve the main structure and then talk about whether we would approve the ADU? And in fact, the main structure may have perhaps some issues with its driveway that might be out of the wetland, which is delineated but perhaps contested because it's been filled in. And then end up saying, we look at the ADU and then say that the ADU has to be of similar materials and look as the rest of the structure. Is that a possible thing to do?
That's not really what your regulations say. That's not what your regulations say.
We have no jurisdiction over the construction of a single-family dwelling.
I'm
The
right.
only reason we're involved here is because the ADU has to be attached to a single-family dwelling. Otherwise, you would not be here with this application.
So that was discussed earlier.
But what I am saying is, should the board consider whether the main structure is okay, and then is the ADU okay, and then we approve the whole thing if that's what we're going to do? In other words, we're segmenting how we're thinking about this particular project. And ultimately, we're having to approve the entire project because that's required by the regulation.
Correct.
But to my way of thinking, the original building is fine, and then if the ADU has similar construction materials, then it is fine too.
Well,
So therefore, the whole project should be fine.
Sort of. It's wetland question aside, and that's something the board still needs to deliberate on as to whether the setback and buffer apply in this case or not, if you want to go down that path. But if the word ADU was removed from the one end of the building, that structure setback, wetland setback question aside, that structure could exist without coming to the board, the entire structure. If that were the sequence, the applicant would then be coming forward saying, I would like this portion of the building to become an ADU. And to your point, then you would only be looking at the use, which is also the applicant's point. He's looking for approval for the use. And the board potentially is looking at it more of a site plan review as to whether the elevations meet the guidelines.
Right, but as you suggest, the regulation is not written for a new structure which includes a main residence and an ADU. So therefore, this is something which is something not dealt with in the regulation.
Correct, other than the fact that the regulations say it's not supposed to look like a duplex. Your definition of duplex doesn't say what a duplex looks like. It talks about similar proportions between areas. And it's not to look like a multifamily. The regulations do not say what a multifamily or a duplex look like. But it has been discussed tonight that there's some suggestion about the second unit or ADU having a side entry door to not look like a duplex. So Mr. Brem's point was the second door is turned to the side and not readily visible from a street frontage or the trail. Whereas,
I'd also say that the majority of the discussion this evening has been about whether the principal structure would be compliant or permitted or whatever you want to say. It hasn't been very much about the ADU itself, which was the...
To me, there's not really a question about what the principal structure is because there's only one structure proposed.
Yeah.
Could we make a conditional approval based on satisfactory renderings and approval of the main structure?
Well, I don't think it has to be a condition as approval of the main structure, because if the main structure isn't approved,
Then it
you
won't be
can't build the ADU anyway.
Right.
But he's trying to find a path so
Yeah, I
he
appreciate
knows what
that.
he can build.
Yeah.
Right, but it would be, we would not conditionally if the other one is built, but we could approve the ADU bits with what you said about the renderings to go along with that house if you build it. So this little package is all approved. Yes, you can plug it into the house that you're going to build.
Yeah, I think other than the questions about the appearance or architecture of the ADU, there hasn't been a lot of concern about the ADU itself. It's been concern about the site as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it ticked all the boxes like it's supposed to, even having that flipping door. So, I mean, it did all of those things you're supposed to do, including 2 parking places that are set apart instead of just 1. So I think all of that stuff for an ADU is the way it's supposed to be. Just the rest of the mechanism of like, this is the cart before the horse is kind of messing up the whole deal. So how do we package it that way? So say, this is good. Now, where's the rest of your bits that you didn't hand in yet? So you can hook them up. I think that's what's holding us up. And the other bits for the entire structure, we're not supposed to be looking at those today. That's not our job
Yes,
today.
we are. Yes, we are.
Are we?
Yes.
There's nothing in our packets that says anything about the rest of the buildings.
I'm sorry about that, but 175-215 clearly relates to accessory dwellings. That's, I mean, so we are supposed to look at it. But I have 2 concerns, Tavis. John Sandine mentioned the conservation overlay district and the limit of the work, the fact that one of the buffer or wetback setlands abuts the building. And, you know, because of Lenore's memo to us, well, it was to yes, it was to Doug. I mean, I'm concerned about that, too. And could you comment on that, please?
Well, to the first part of that, the majority of the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District deals with development near a wetland. You then have special use permits provided for those developments within the setback or buffer. Primarily structures within the setback or buffer. I don't believe, looking at the proposed plan, there is a structure within a buffer or setback. It's a question really about whether the proposed driveway over the existing gravel within debatably a setback or buffer is required to have a special use permit. So my suggestion for the board is to provide the applicant the option to revise the driveway around the setback if that's what you believe is required, or around the buffer, really. Or if the exemption to wetland setbacks and buffers, as provided in 175-7A1, the only exception would be for driveways. There is not a clear definition of driveway in the regulations other than what you would normally think of as a definition of a driveway, which is how one gets off the public way to their structure. Mr. Brem suggested that the parking is outside that area and the driveway is not. So it really boils down, for me, to the planning board to determine if the wetland setback overlay conservation district was intended to comply for areas being still required to provide a setback and buffer to an area that's already disturbed. The majority of the ordinance says it's supposed to remain in an unaltered natural state, which I think you saw in the site walk, this area is not. If the driveway were in this wetland, absolutely, it would require a state wetland fill permit. If the board determines it's in the setback and the buffer, it probably requires a special use permit. But if it's a driveway, the section exempts it. So 175 driveway is a private vehicular access connecting a house, parking area, or garage to or other building with the street, which is basically what I saw Mr. Brem define. He's showing that vehicular access connecting the house, parking area, and garage or other building with the street. He's not parking in it. He's not putting a structure in it.
A parking lot is a structure under the definition in the ordinance.
Yes, and absolutely no driveway or parking area complies with setbacks if you impose that. The definition of structure says that anything with a permanent location on the ground. So technically, a doghouse would have to meet setbacks.
Okay.
But driveways have never been interpreted to require setback compliance.
The other concern that I have is the access. Suzanne brought up some issues, but, I mean, is this a lot without frontage? And how does the easement fit into this? Willow Street is here. Looks like the front setback should be.
The Willow Street right-of-way goes to the private side of the trail. There is then an easement that was created by this body years ago to satisfy Lot 15 and 17. As I mentioned, the statute 674-41 1B2, a street on a subdivision plat approved by the planning board, and then the planning board approval in 1993 with the boundary line adjustment that actually effectuated this easement, is a signed planning board plat that shows Willow Street going just as I described. So it is not a class 6 road, it is not a private way, it is not an easement. Willow Street crosses the railroad, which is now the trail. So to me, and the board can go a different way if you want, I think the board is satisfied under 674-41.
That would mean that the street giving access to
the lots. Yeah, both this lot and the Smittick lot next door, yes.
And that's the issue for 674-41.
Correct.
Can I ask a
So
question?
a follow-up condition to that with that vein of thought would be that the Public Works Director would have to sign off on the development within that right-of-way, that little bit of right-of-way on the private side of the trail, which would address the stop sign location, whether it's a stop, a slow, a yield, what have you, and how the portion of the driveway within the right-of-way was constructed would have to be done to town standards for the extent that it's a driveway.
Can I ask a question? So if we approve the ADU and it's 15,000 square feet, or 1,500 square feet, are we then tying our hands in that we now have to approve Unit 1 to be around 5,400 square feet? Because it's going to have to be the 30% or so?
If you were to grant the ADU, they would be only able to build what's on the plan. If they change that plan, they would have to have it either modified or, it wouldn't have to come back because the use would be approved, but if it modifies, they're still subject to the 750 square feet or set 30%, whichever's greater.
So in essence, we're going to have to approve the main house to be about 5,400 square feet.
Well, no. Again, if Mr. Brem proposed a single-family home that looks just like that, it would be built. He would then apply to this board to come back to convert a portion of it up to, but not in excess of 30% of it, to an ADU. So you'd not really be looking at anything other than, is he altering the outside? Is he providing the adequate parking? And does the square footage requirement meet?
But if he doesn't build something that's about 5,400 square feet, then the ADU is more than, say he's only approved for 4,000 square feet. The ADU now is more than 30%.
Correct. He either has to build what's approved or modify it to comply with the 30%. If he wanted to build a 6,000 square foot house and a larger ADU, he could do that because the use permit would still be in place.
Tabs, I think I can clear this up a little bit. Jane, I think what Tabs is trying to say is that what we potentially could do this evening. Is this on?
It doesn't sound it.
No, it doesn't.
Put some more air behind it.
How about that? There we go. If we approve the ADU this evening, it will approve the use, but not the specific size. So it could, in theory, in the future be redesigned to a different size that complies with all the ordinances. So if he went to a smaller house, he would then potentially have to have a smaller ADU because we haven't approved a specific square footage. We've just approved the use in principle.
No, that's not correct. We're approving what is on this plan. And in order to proceed, Mr. Brown, assuming we approve this, would need to construct a single-family dwelling as shown on this plan. And it would need to be the same size because of the proposed size of the ADU. And we're approving this particular ADU if we approve this.
So if we were to approve it and Mr. Brem wanted to make a smaller ADU, he would have to come back for a new approval, is that right?
Well, that was kind of a split question.
I have another tactic. What if we approve this as a single-family dwelling, and once you can show us that it does not look like it is designed to occupy more than one family, we could segregate a part of it and show that it's an ADU. You can build it as a single-family dwelling.
I don't think that's the application before the board.
Interestingly, there was some concerns raised earlier about whether sections of the zoning ordinance had been met, and then it was a unanimous vote to consider the application complete. So there's a little bifurcation in that. But the board would have the ability at this point to deny the application without prejudice or approve it with conditions. The applicant could then resubmit. The applicant can submit for a single-family structure, build the structure, and then come back for an ADU at a later date, which is kind of what you're suggesting. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to split out the fact this board can't approve or doesn't have authority to approve a single-family home.
Right.
But I also think the approach taken here, where the applicant has shown the unit and what he wants to construct, is a positive way to proceed. I think that we're not suddenly saying, oh yeah, I'm going to build a single-family house, and then all of a sudden have 2 days later an application for an ADU. I think the applicant is showing us what he intends to do, and I think he needs a special use permit, and I think that we do need something better. I'm not convinced it's architectural renderings, but we do need at least some kind of elevation that portrays this.
So maybe the applicant could be given the opportunity to consider revising the driveway to be respective of the setback and buffer and return with building elevation so that the board can complete its deliberations.
I guess I would say that it could be brought to a committee, as you suggested might be possible, as a smaller group of the planning board. And if they have questions, then to bring it to the full board.
That's up to the board.
That would be the way that I would prefer to have it happen. Because I don't think it's, all he's going to have to do is to produce plans that make it look similar, which is not, I don't think it's a big lift. And to require coming back to the board and all that kind of thing and having a hearing on it or continue the hearing seems pretty much to me a little extreme.
Well, without knowing
I'm
how
not
long-
convinced you can approve that without another hearing or continuation of this hearing. And I also think we are elected to this board in order to make these decisions and not to delegate them to somebody else. And I think that, it should be a fairly simple, straightforward.
So I've been
make
paying
happen.
some attention, but not complete attention. I don't know if anyone that was here when the hearing is closed has left or not, but you may want to reopen the hearing and continue to June 4th so that additional information can be provided with regard to wetland setback buffer, driveway alignment, and a rendering. If that were to be extended at the request of the applicant, because that's not enough, I don't know how long it takes to get architectural renderings. That is something the applicant could agree to or not agree to. It's kind of.
Can I speak, even though the hearing is closed?
Reopen this.
We can reopen the public hearing.
Do you need to take a vote on that?
Aye.
We have a motion to reopen the public hearing?
Seconded.
Seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consider it open.
Okay, I told you before I don't like to fight, so I'm going to preface this by saying that I was born on my mother's birthday, and my mother also had my nephew born on her birthday. That birthday happens to be June 4th. There's no way I'm coming here on June 4th. And you need to understand this is a long historical thing that we've done with my family.
The 18th is the next option.
I don't want to come back on the 18th either. I just don't. I don't mind bringing you architectural plans. I don't mind bringing it to the whole board. I really don't. I think you're going to be fine with it. I don't have any doubt of that. What I don't want to do, as I said before, is it's not an easy task. It is an easy task, but I have to hire an architect, and I really want to use a local architect. I've already made some inquiries, and it makes sense for everybody, I think, to use someone from the Lakes region to do it, someone to build it from this area. Trying to do as you said, Mr. Murray, I'm trying to do the right thing here. And I keep getting kickback. And I know it's a process. It's what I do for a living. But I don't think it's a big lift from your end either to conditionally approve it for me to come back. I will not be able to pull a building permit. You're guaranteed that. I will have to come back. I'm not on a massive timeline. That's the one good thing on this. I hope to start this project about this time next year. So I'm not in a big rush. But I also want to hire an architect after I have the ADU. So that's my issue. And I want to talk to an architect, and I want to do it right. And it's not going to be an easy lift, because you got to draw it out, do the floor plans. My wife's involved. If all of you know, have ever designed a house with your wife before, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. It's going to be probably a 4 or 5 month design process. So you wouldn't see me back here till eons from now. And I'm not going to keep coming back every time I change something. Like you said, Mr. Murray, these are the plans that I have to build. So you want me to whip off an architectural rendering, come back here, then come back in 4 months and say, we made some changes, we moved a closet here, we put a doorway here. I don't want to do that. I want to do it right. I'm going to do it right. And I just said, please just give me a conditional approval, and I'll come back in front of the whole board. I have no problem with that. And we could take time then, because I have time. It's the one thing I have.
But we already have floor plans, right? I mean,
well, those are my floor plans, but an architect's going to play around with it, you know that, and say you really want, because of a structure or a pole or some kind of a load-bearing wall, he's going to want to move things internally and all that. We're going to look at trying to do this right, thinking about doing geothermal. If we do geothermal, I have to have an area in the basement set aside for that. There's a lot of things to think about. I appreciate you, Mr. Goodwin, you're right. It isn't a very heavy lift. But I have a lot of things to think about before we get there. And I have no problem coming back, even if it's 6 months from now, when I have these final plans and say, here they are. So I'd really appreciate if you could approve it with whatever condition you want. And if it's determined by the building inspector that I got to come back with a special use permit, if he's a code enforcement officer, if he's the one, and he and Lenora and Jason and Tavis and I can talk, and it's determined that I have to get a special use permit, I'll come back for that too. And as Mr. Sandine said, there is an exemption for 1,800 square feet of work in the buffer zone. There's no way I'm going to be doing 1,800 square feet of work for the driveway. So I'd meet the exemption anyway. That's all I have. Please try to address it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So-
Any other further public comment while we have it open?
I think you've clearly shown that the application for an ADU is the back end of a application for a single-family home. And so you're going at this backwards. And I think that's complicating the entire discussion. It's complicating your decision about the single-family home. It's complicating your decision about the ADU. And I just can't understand why this was allowed to be brought before the planning board on just the ADU issue by itself, because it's clearly tied to the single-family dwelling that's going on the property. And in addition, Tavis's comment that this would not have to come before the planning board, I cannot understand how that would be true, because it's within the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District. And it does encroach on wetlands. It does encroach on the buffers. So how can it be simply approved with no planning board input? That's my additional comment.
Thank you.
I did not know that there was a plat recorded for the, whatever this easement is off of Willow Street. However, state law says if the town hasn't maintained it for 5 years, which we know they haven't, it's a Class 6. I would ask that you look into that.
Any other?
Audrey Klein, I do think that the process is a little bit, is difficult because the use request also brings in those 6 criteria for the accessory dwelling unit, some of which you don't have the information for, which is, does it look like a single-family dwelling? And I understand that there's, you don't want to come in here with full-blown architectural plans, but it's fairly, there's other levels of drawings that can be submitted, that are more like sketches that show you the massing and the blocks of the building and whether, in fact, it does look like a single-family dwelling or not. You don't have to spend, tens of thousands of dollars to get a sketch of the basic massing of the building. So, and I think that's what you're missing with regard to that one thing. I don't think you can tell what that looks like. It looks like there's a garage in between 2 buildings. And, it's been said, well, what does a duplex look like? Well, that's, when you look at it, you have to then decide whether that looks like 2 buildings. And you can't see that without some kind of sketch. I guess that's it.
Thank you. Any other further public comment? We'll close the public session.
I wouldn't.
No?
I wouldn't.
Do we want to close it or we
want to
continue it?
Yeah.
The reason I say that is there's nothing that says, you can close the public hearing, you can begin deliberations, you don't have to complete deliberations tonight, you can do that at a future meeting. But if you were contemplating, any of you, a condition where the applicant is to return with more information, that would be entered into the record. That needs to be done in a public hearing.
Thank you.
So perhaps and if you don't continue a hearing, then it has to be renoticed and you're essentially starting all over again. So conceivably, you could, approve the application with a condition that the applicant is required to come back with an architectural rendering and representation of wetland compliance or otherwise for board ratification at a later date. or you could simply continue the hearing to a date specific. If that gets pushed out 8, 10 months at the applicant's request, I'd make sure he puts together a request saying, I'm requesting to continue to a later date. It would have to be accepted by the board and set a date specific in order to continue it, but that essentially could be continued until the applicant's no longer willing to continue it.
All right, so considering that the public hearing is still open, is there any discussion amongst the board as to how you think we might proceed?
I'm uncomfortable. I mean, I think this could come in as a single-family house, as long as he's, not digging within the 25-foot setback. Never mind the gravel area. Maybe condition of like snow fencing there or something. But I'm not comfortable saying that it was designed to not look like it occupies more than one family, because I don't have enough information. And I think it's a bad precedent to set. So I would vote for the continuance.
Yeah,
Can you repeat that, Vaughn? Did you just say is just the renderings basically that you want?
Yeah, to show that it doesn't look
That's fine.
like a
I just
multifamily
wasn't following
structure. It
completely.
looks like it was designed to occupy one family, not more than one family.
Brad, did you have a comment?
Yeah. I understand this is, kind of the cart before the horse type application here, because we usually have the ADU system is set up to convert part of an existing home. And I get Mr. Brem's want to know, going into this project, if it's going to be feasible for him to, to proceed with this, to get that unit onto his building here. Understanding that, I believe we're really here for the ADU portion of this project, as has been stated many times tonight. If he did want to come in with just with a single-family building here, we wouldn't even be sitting here this evening. They'd be dealing with Tavis and Jason on just getting a building permit to put in a building and then, come in later on. So I can appreciate the fact that he wants to present his entire plan to us ahead of time for this. So that being said, too, looking at some of the issues that have come up or concerns that have come up on the wetland setback and that stuff, I don't believe we're here really to address means and ways of how they're going to go about a project. The delineations are there for the setbacks that he has to comply with. And how they do that is going to be up to the developer and the contractor and stuff to do that in a way to stay within the regulations on all of that. I would be okay with doing a conditional approval tonight for the two things that have been kind of mentioned here. One is the renderings portion of it to confirm that it's not going to look like a completely separate building attached to the main house, and to put a little more thought or whatever information into the wetland setback along the driveway. I am convinced that it is a driveway. It's not a parking area there, because the parking area spots are in front of the garage doors, and the two over in front of the ADU unit is shown. So that section that's in question is, in my mind, a driveway. So however that falls within the regulations there, I'd be okay with a condition upon that being addressed and then that portion brought back at a later date, as Mr. Brem had offered to do here. So that's kind of my thoughts on it and how I'd view approaching it anyway.
Any other discussion?
I would think that perhaps dealing with a change in the way the driveway is, according to the wetlands, may be a reasonably easy solution for that particular problem. The other thing is that if we had a conditional statement that said that the ADU would agree with, or the exterior of the ADU would be in compliance with the ADU regulations, that would end up, I think, being sufficient to say that it had to be done in a particular way. And I don't think that to make it in that statement that it has to be in compliance with the ADU regulations, it allows the owner to deal with that. And I would also suggest that if he is looking at this as a resident as his own, he's not going to make it look horrible because he's going to live there.
The only thing I would add to that is going back to Roger's point, I believe it is the planning board's job to determine if the aesthetic matches the regulation. So
I'm saying,
I land on
your
both
aesthetics are
sides
different
of
from my
this, but-
aesthetics, and so therefore that to me is a problem. In other words, if you end up making a regulation that says it's supposed to look nice, it's nice to me and not nice to you.
Right.
I'm not quite sure about the conditional approval, but I think that I would be in favor of granting a continuance with the only two issues to be addressed, whether the ADU meets the requirements in terms of the design and appearance, and addressing the wetlands.
Yeah,
And
right.
but I think he needs to come back in, but I think in all fairness to the applicant, it should be clear that those are the only issues we're going to be addressing, unless there's some other issue somebody thinks needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I was going to suggest a condition, as stated in the memo from Conservation Commission, that they come in with a more accurate drawing that specifically shows that they're not intruding. And I think they really need to do that. The other condition that I'd like to see is some determination made by our attorney or something that this is not a Class 6 road. And those are two conditions that I'd like to see.
Any other discussion? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to have two conditions added to what Tavis probably has associated with plats and everything else. And one condition would be to adjust the driveway position and parking lot position to agree with the wetlands defined by the surveyor. And also to have, and the second condition would be to have the ADU comply with the appropriate, construction techniques associated with,
It needs to look like it was
to make it look like,
one family.
make it look like one family abode, which would be associated with what the ADU regulations are about.
And that's 175-57.1.
Peter, are you looking for renderings, for example?
The regulations for the ADU are that the building looks in a certain particular way. And if we say that the building has to be done in that way, then it is going to be associated with those regulations.
So that would be 175-57.1E2, which starts out referencing exterior alterations, enlargements, or extensions. So we're applying, you're implying that alterations, enlargement, or extensions apply to a new structure.
Correct.
Okay.
And also 175-215B.
Peter, do you want to add that to your motion?
That's a conditional use permit.
And what's that? The immediate neighborhood?
175-215B says immediate neighborhood impact, that the proposal maintains the aesthetic continuity for the primary dwelling unit as a single-family dwelling. The ADU entry door is not visible to the public way.
I would agree.
So
Peter, was that a motion?
was that a motion to approve with conditions?
Well,
That would be a motion to approve the conditions.
Okay.
We can add conditions, right?
That's what he's doing.
Okay,
Well,
well, I'm going to add another condition.
I'm not in favor of
Ask
approving
for a
this
second.
with conditions.
Have a second.
Was there a second?
I don't think there's a second yet.
The
because
motion hasn't been completed yet.
I'm just wondering if the motion's been completed, because
I think Peter's motion was completed, so it would have
All
to
right.
see if there's a second, and if there's not a second,
Okay, well,
then it dies.
I
in making
really
the
would
motion.
like some determination from our attorney that this is a Class 5 road, not a Class 6 road. I think we need to clear that up.
Okay.
And so that would be my condition.
I'll make a second to Peter's motion just so we can continue a discussion here on it. I think that's protocol to do that, so.
Thank you.
So that was a motion to approve with the 2 recommended conditions from the review,
Correct.
plus the one discussed earlier of a stop sign at the rail trail on the private property side of the trail. It was proposed by the applicant, so I'm just making it a condition so it's clear. And then you added a condition to adjust driveway setback to conform with wetland buffer and setback.
Correct.
And then the last one was the ADU shall be shown to comply with 175-57.1E and 175-215B.
Correct.
And there was a second to that.
And that was seconded.
Correct.
And is the applicant going to be coming back into the board to,
Not with that motion.
okay.
As I
Yeah.
hear it, that's a motion to approve that's been
No, he
seconded.
cannot
Mr.
speak.
Chair,
He can't
the hearing, I
speak.
think, is
No,
still
oh.
open.
Wait,
Okay.
we're voting. I think we're voting.
So, all in favor?
Any discussion?
Oh, any discussion, excuse me. So Kathy has a point to make about the Class
Yeah.
6 road.
Well, yes, I thought that got added as a
No,
condition.
it has not been added yet.
Oh, okay, well, I'm suggesting that it be added.
I understand.
To determine if
So
there's
then
a-
you'd ask if that's okay with Peter and with Brad.
So,
Okay, is that-
Peter, can we add that to your motion?
Yes.
So we're looking for a determination from legal counsel that it is not a Class 6 road? Or are we looking for legal verification that this comports with 67441?
Do we really need the town's attorney to advise us on whether it's a Class 6 road?
I don't believe so, but the board member requested it. It's clearly not a Class 6 road because it was never a 5 road, but no one's alleging that it was a 5, and therefore it can't be a 6.
Well, Willow's of Class
It would be good
5.
to get it clarified.
Willow is a Class 5, yes. I believe the public was suggesting that the portion of the 5 is not a 5, but a 6. But since there is no road, you can't discontinue maintenance of it, so it can't be a 6.
But if it's shown on an approved plan,
That's the decision staff has made, yes, but it's coming up tonight because of public comment.
Brad, would you accept Kathy's addition?
Did Peter accept it in his motion?
I did.
Oh, yes, then I will.
But what is it? Are we looking to prove that Willow is not a Class 6, or are we looking that the property complies with 67441?
Kathy, that's to you.
Yeah, I think we want to know if it's a Class 6 road or not.
Okay?
Could we simply say that the public,
So a determination from legal counsel if Willow Street is a Class 6 road. Okay.
is not a Class 6 road,
Well,
right?
correct.
All right, motion's been made and seconded.
No,
You're in the discussion phase, correct?
No, we're in discussion amongst the board at the moment.
But you didn't close the public hearing, so
No.
it's up to you.
Go ahead.
All right. I just want to make the board feel comfortable because it's not in the motion. And I know you have to, I guess, rely on myself. I promise to come to this board at a scheduled meeting, at a not scheduled meeting, it's up to you, to show you the plans before I pull a building permit. I promise to do that. So regardless of the way the condition's worded, you will see me here, unless you don't want to. And then you can tell Tavis, we don't want to see Mr. Brown, we saw his plans, they're fine. But I don't want to skirt the issue. It's just a timing thing. Thank you.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm opposed.
Was that
How many?
Do the ayes again with a hand raised.
Raise hands. All in favor? And opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
See you again.
All right, the next hearing on the agenda, the next discussion item, excuse me, is lot merger for Tracy Sanford Whitehead, Valerie C. Sanford, Catherine Sanford Morgan, Sarah Sanford Miller, tax map on lot 22306 and 22316, 22361, 22315, 22310, 22312, addresses 74, 76, 86, and 90 Point of Pines Road.
As a butter, I need to excuse myself.
Oh, okay, so we...
And we have two members who have recused themselves.
And Julie and Jane could now sit.
So Julie,
Yeah, yeah.
Julie and Jane, will you sit?
I'll sit.
Did Roger leave?
Yes, Roger's stepping down. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Randy Walker. I work for Walker & Varney here in Wolfeboro. I want to thank you for having me be second on the agenda tonight.
You're welcome.
So I'm here representing four ladies who are all sisters that own four houses at the end of Point of Pines Road, which is on Lake Wentworth. That's Tracy Whitehead, Sarah Sanford Miller, who's here this evening, Kate Morgan, and Valerie Sanford. And they own 7 lots. Their goal is to compress them down into 4. You have a plan that shows what that ultimate configuration would look like. Their ultimate goal is that each sister will own 1 house and 1 lot. The goal is very simple, to make the existing lots bigger. It should be a no-brainer. This is the 3rd time that they've merged lots, and each time this board has approved the merger. The town planner did suggest on the May 15th, 2024 planner review that if this board was inclined to approve this merger, that there be a condition. That condition is absolutely unequivocally unacceptable to the applicant. I believe Tavis is going to suggest an amendment, but I am directed to withdraw the application and/or ask that you continue it if the board is inclined to approve that restriction. So what is that restriction? That restriction that was suggested was that there be a note on the plan prohibiting further habitable space development on the resulting lots. We don't want any restrictions on this. We're actually merging lots together. Why should there be any restriction whatsoever on a merger? So if the board is inclined to adopt that, then we will withdraw the application. Other than that, we would hope that you approve it. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So I really generally have no problem with making these lots bigger. I just think that some of these lots consolidated will have, one will have 4 accessory buildings, one will have 3. The end one already has 4. I mean, it's part of the regulations, and we're supposed to look. I think you're supposed to get 2.
Most of these buildings have been there for over 100 years, and there's no suggested changes in the buildings at all.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, on the recommended conditions of approval, first, there is a typo. Applicant shall record plan as approved 12/20/22. That was a find and replace that held on without my catching it. So, Mr. Walker sort of misrepresented what happened. In November of '22, there was a merger that this board approved after looking at a plan of land that Norway Plains put together. Then on 12/20/22, the planning board approved the boundary line adjustment, which is what you see in the left-hand image in the planning review, the dashed line going away. And in that case, the red box, the blue box, the green box, and the yellow box were the resultant lots. The planning board at that time put in a condition that those lower lots, if you will, were not to contain any additional habitable space. That determination was made by the condition was made by the planning board because the act of a boundary line adjustment is statutorily considered a re-subdivision of land, which in this case would be a subdivision plat signed by the planning board, which has in it labeled Point of Pine. So effectively, the boundary line adjustment plan would become, it sounds familiar now, 674-41 AB2, a plat approved by the planning board. Currently, none of these lots are on a road as defined by 674-41. So realistically, as currently configured, the recommended condition of approval applies to all of the lots on Point of Pines. Now that could be argued, but it hasn't been. I think to Mr. Walker's point, there's no reason that a restriction could be placed in the same area as originally agreed to by the applicant on the southern side of Point of Pines for no additional habitable space. At the time, it was questioned by the public whether that was an overreach of the board or not, but nonetheless, the board made that a condition. So everything on the lower side of the non-road that would become a road once the boundary line adjustment plan is recorded would not have additional habitable space. My understanding was the applicants, or the applicant's client in this case, were okay with that because largely there's no land down there that would support habitable space anyway. The concern the planning board had was that if the boundary line adjustment plan were to manifest as approved in 12/20/22 without that restriction, 3 more homes could be built down there because Point of Pines would become a road. So the planning board put that condition in. So I am perfectly willing to say, revise the recommended condition of approval to state applicant shall record the plan as approved 12/20/22 and conceivably 5/21/24, where those areas identified on the 12/20/22 plan shall preclude habitable space development. That says nothing about the habitable space on the upper side, north side, however you want to refer to it. I believe it's probably the west, really, but the top in the picture, where the homes are, would not be precluded from pulling building permits under 674-41, which I think was where the angst came with.
And I agree with everything that Tavis just said, except that I misrepresented. But there was a boundary line agreement out there. There was a condition put on the back lots, as I call them. That condition can absolutely stay on those lots. It's there. We're not trying to change that, but we want to make sure that, I'll say, the waterfront portion of the lots do not have that similar restriction carried over to that. That's what we want to be very clear on, that if they want to do something with the waterfront house, that they would have the same rights that everyone else has to come in and not be prohibited in any way. The back lot, no problem. That restriction's already there. Leave it there, but don't add it to the waterfront side.
So how that would read would be applicant shall record plan as approved 12/20/22 and 5/21/24 with note to refer to those areas as identified on the 12/20/22 plat and the subsequent note to preclude habitable space on that portion of the lot. Another alternative that I would be acceptable to if Mr. Walker wanted to, or his clients wanted to have Mr. Walker to, would be define a no habitable space easement over that lower portion. The idea is simply to keep no more residential space from being constructed on the lower side. Any mechanism to get there is acceptable.
So when these become, 4 bigger lots, or except for the last one, the one on the north, you can't put additional habitable space that's not attached to the dwelling anyway.
Correct.
Until the new law passes.
Oh, right, but we can't go down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
But the question that was posed to me earlier today was, well, one of them might want to put a deck or a porch. That to me would not be prohibited by this language, but I understand the reservation. Someone might all of a sudden have 5 grandchildren and want to put an addition on their home. I think the idea is they should be able to modify their home consistent with the shoreline regulations, et cetera, without prohibition. The planning board's intent, as I literally watched the video again and went through the minutes again, the idea was not to allow 3 additional homes to be constructed down there.
No.
Technically, that would happen when it all becomes one lot anyway, but the board made specifically the condition no habitable space on that lower half. That's why we're sort of kicking this dead animal down Point of Pines.
Now, the dotted path through the whole bits, that's just strictly a dotted path. The lot is that,
Point
the
of
lot is
Pine-
the entire red section, and then the next lot is the entire green section.
Point of Pines is effectively a right-of-way across all of the
It's a
lots down
right-of-way.
there. Correct.
Okay.
And we just don't,
Once they record the boundary line adjustment, at least that section, arguably more of Point of Pines, becomes a road.
Right, but what you're talking about, the upper and lower sections, but we can't split it up again later.
That's why I
Once it
suggested.
becomes one, it's one.
That's why I suggested the condition refer to that area as defined on the 12/20/22 plan would still be subject to that provision. So that would refer to the lower lot. The original condition spoke to individual parcel numbers,
Right,
which
Now
will
it's
be
gonna be
going
1, 2,
away
3,
when
4.
they're merged.
right. So the red is red, the blue is blue, then just one. But
Correct.
they'd still be able to do that ADU word, correct?
On the upper portion?
Off the houses,
Yes.
because aren't the garages on the lower half? Aren't those garages, basically?
we'll call it the east side of the road and the west side where the main waterfront houses are. We just don't want any restrictions on that.
Yeah, the houses are on the
that
top
everyone
side.
else has. So the west side, of the lot, we
Yes.
don't want that restricted,
Yeah,
and it's
to-
not
to-
restricted now. The east side of the lot is already restricted, that's fine. We have no issues with that, we just don't want new restrictions put on by virtue of this merger. That would be unfair.
Any more discussion amongst the board?
I just have a question. This thing that goes across everywhere, it looks like a path. It has wetlands delineation in it. Is that a buffer? I can't read it. Is that just a narrow strip of wetlands? What is that?
I have no idea, but we're not trying to build anything, we're just trying to merge lots,
No,
whatever is
just
there.
wondering what the land is.
There's a wetland boundary, and there is a 75-foot setback from very poorly drained soils called out, which really is right along the bottom edge of the road in most places.
Okay.
So effectively, the condition would prohibit habitable space on the east side of the road, or the bottom, however you want to describe the picture. Everything else on that portion of the lot would be subject to presumably a special use permit or similar, because it's within the wetland setback and buffer. And then the lots on the west side, or the housing side, if you will, would be subject to the shoreland regulations.
And we're happy to comply with all those rules and regulations. We just don't want anything new put on as a result of this approval.
Okay, so you're okay with the way condition 1 reads?
Say again?
You're all right with the
Not as it
condition
reads, no.
1?
Not condition 1 as it's written there, but condition 1 as Tavis has
Yeah,
rephrased it.
okay, all right.
Correct. Yeah, the revised number 1.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Right, so it would say applicant shall record plan as approved 12/20/22 and as approved 5/21/24, prohibiting further habitable space development on the portions of those resulting lots as shown on the 12/20/22 approval.
Can we just make it clear that the eastern side of the road is something like that, but it does not apply to the western side, just to be clear?
Those easterly portions.
That would be great. I think we're saying the same thing, we just
We
have
are.
to get there, yeah.
And that's the 2022 approval.
Correct.
Okay.
So if you're looking at the staff review, conditions of approval, suggested condition of approval number 1 will read applicant shall record plan that's approved 12/20/22 and 5/20/24, prohibiting further habitable space development on those easterly portions of the resulting lots as described in 12/20/22 approval.
Okay,
Suggested condition number 2 is applicant shall be responsible for recording fees for notice of merger.
Could I just suggest, and not the western side, just to be definitive that it's not the western side? Thank you.
So easterly,
Eastern, but
well,
not western.
my concern, and this is, I mean, you're the attorney. But easterly, and neither the word easterly nor westerly are described in the 12/20/22 approval or the plan. If the board is comfortable saying on those easterly portions and not the westerly portions of those lots, my thought originally was
Of the resulting lot.
well, that's where I started, on prohibiting further habitable space development on the resultant lot and those portions as described in the 12/20/22 approval.
All right.
Or easterly, westerly, we can,
I think the minutes will be very clear as to what the intent was.
Okay,
And perhaps we need to say easterly as divided by the road.
That would be fine.
I think we should go back to the original, just with the added portions of those per 2022 approval, because that's clearly what was on that plan.
given enough time, we could probably come up with 40 ways to write it. I think the intent is clear.
So, yeah, I think the intent is clear, and I guess, Randy, what you're looking for now is a feeling from the board as to whether they would accept that.
Yes.
So, I can only...
Okay, are we, can I make a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just a discussion at the moment, but go ahead.
Oh, okay, I thought we were done discussing.
No, I mean, it's just a discussion item.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's
All
not a
right,
public
well,
hearing.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, you're welcome to make a motion.
No, that's fine.
So perhaps what I'm hearing is a motion to approve subject to the conditions as discussed herein. And
That's
if there's
what I was going to do.
Go ahead.
And then I'll second that after you finish, Kathy.
Okay, all right.
You want to make that motion, Kathy?
Should we open the public?
There's no hearing.
No?
Yes, I'll make that motion, that we approve that with the conditions that Tavis has just gone over. And Julia's going to,
Julie?
And I'm going to second that.
all right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
The next thing on the agenda is something the board has already discussed. Just, quite literally, just over 2 years ago, the parcel in question requested an application in front of the Zoning Board of Adjustment under 175-55.1 for a special exception for construction of a single-family home on a lot without frontage. Per statute, that special exception expired March 14th of this year. We are now a skoonch past that. So with the strict interpretation and reading of the regulations, the applicant is being required to go back for a new special exception. It's a new property owner, but going back for a new special exception. And as I identify in the, it's not really a review, but summary review, 175-55-1C1 first requires review and comment by the planning board. So you don't have to make a motion per se, but if any board members have particular comments, the last time you did not, but if you have any comments on the proposed single-family development of that lot or concern about special exception being granted anew to this lot, I would voice them suggest you voice them into the record, and they will be transmitted to the zoning board.
Okay, well, nothing has changed since we last looked at this, right?
Only the property owner and the style of the home.
Okay.
I feel that it's just, the date is just stretched. Nothing has changed.
I agree.
I drove by the other day, it looks the same.
This is my first one of these, but based on the information we received in our packets, I certainly don't feel that I can comment on this. There's no right-of-way shown. I had to get out, look at the tax map to find out where this was. I have no idea what the access is, and in here it says that the lot is supposed to comply with all other zoning requirements, and this lot is 0.35 acres. I don't know how that's been interpreted, but that would not appear to be compliant.
This is not a subdivision, though. This is already existent.
It's a lawfully existing lot well prior to zoning. It has a deeded right-of-way that actually crosses South Main, goes all the way over to the river. So all of those i's were dotted and t's were crossed with the previous special exception, but procedurally, the zoning board is going to be looking for comments. I can get additional materials to the board if you'd like to reconsider or want to see more information prior to determining if you have any comments.
Well, I certainly think it would be helpful in one of these if we had something big enough. The rest of the board is familiar with this, apparently. But I think it would be helpful if we had a plan large enough so you could see what was on it. And I thought I went through one of these where there was great discussion about the right-of-way and the right of access on another parcel. And it seems to me we should have better information.
So I personally have traveled on this driveway that goes to the house beyond this lot. So it exists. The one I did, it was years ago when I was on that driveway. But it's alongside of a fence as you go up the hill toward Weston Auto Body.
What was the reason that this came back, that they ran out of time? They just strictly ran out of time?
Special exceptions granted under this section shall expire if not exercised within 2 years of the date of approval, which expired 3/14/24.
And you said there was a sale? This changed hands?
No, because they didn't pull a building permit within 2 years, so it dies. The state put that in 2013-ish, because there were, prior to 2013, there were special exceptions and variances that were granted when somebody's father was a father, and people said, well, no, here's the variance right here. And there was nothing that statutorily concluded them. But after 2013, interestingly, one of the things that the town didn't adopt, not that it has to do with this particular property, the statute also allows you to go back and retroactively put a 2-year timeline on all those variances or special exceptions prior to 2013. But the town did not do that. But statutorily, they expire within 2 years, day forward, both a variance or a special exception. There is some more language in there for those reading along in their statute books at home. Can be further extended by action of the planning board or granted an extension for good cause, but those have to be done prior to the expiration.
And did you also say, though, that the property changed hands in the past 2 years?
Yes. The last time it came in was actually the real estate agent trying to sell the lot. Somebody then decided not to build, sold it to somebody else. Time elapsed, and here we are.
And they probably didn't count right at that point.
Okay, so Roger, he wants to see more background information, is that right, Roger?
Well, if the board's familiar with this, I don't feel a specific need, but it would be helpful in the future.
I think we also have, Roger, I think you also have the opportunity to submit comments, even if it's not made during this meeting, if you want to submit comments to the ZBA prior to their meeting.
I mean, I looked at the tax map, and so I could find out where it was, and but there's no right-of-way delineated on the tax map, which I guess is probably a blow-up of.
That's correct. There's nothing on the tax map reflecting the 15-foot right-of-way from, I think it was 1890s. It's basically an easement over an existing driveway.
Does anybody have any comments that they would like to be recorded for the benefit of the ZBA?
Well, Julie and I did.
Yes,
You just? Yeah.
you were listening.
Yeah, so no, I'm sorry, additional comments, excuse me.
What were the comments?
Nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed from,
Give it
Well,
back to
I don't
them.
think-
Nothing's changed. Give it back to them.
But I don't think we need to tell the ZBA nothing has changed. We just need to say that we have no concerns, I would think.
okay,
Well, because nothing has changed.
yeah, right.
Sure.
Yep, the ownership's changed, which.
So
I
the
think
official
was
comment that will,
significant.
the official comment that will go on behalf of the planning board is the planning board has no concerns as the situation has not changed since prior review.
Other than ownership.
Other than ownership, right, right.
The last item, as you're all aware, your packet did not include minutes of the 5/7/24 meeting. I have yet to receive those. Your minute taker is very apologetic. I may have an email now or I'll have one tomorrow, but they are not ready for review, and I'll send those out as soon as they are here. And yes, we are working to make sure we're complying with these statutory requirements as best we can.
And the last item, is there any public comment? No? Okay.
Have we heard anything from the Housing Appeals Board?
I have no communication. I participated, I was a fly on the wall. They largely allowed the appellant, the property owner, and town council to speak. They concluded, they said, thank you, we'll give you a determination within 60 days per statute.
So they've got another 30 or so.
Ish, yeah.
Okay, I just have one item. Conservation subdivision. I checked with Vaughn when she came in. We both remember that this was to be brought to the whole planning board, not the committee. So if we could put that on a future agenda, that would be great. And also, the multifamily forum that we have, we really need to discuss that.
Yeah, so I agree with Kathy. We need to discuss the multifamily forum and provide public feedback as we promised that we would. So perhaps we can put that on the next meeting's agenda.
I think we also need to make some progress on short-term rentals.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I agree.
So
that needs to go back
that
to
seems to get the largest amount of attention from the members of the public.
Yeah, certainly it's high profile.
So I believe today was the deadline for the 6/3 for any applications to come in. I'm not aware of any applications that were received, so the 6/3 agenda will be effectively a fun work session to look at conservation subdivision regulations, multifamily forum discussion and update, and short-term rental.
And I'd like to suggest that we bring the language that we had 4 years ago forward, just to start the discussion and figure out what was wrong with that and what needs changing or not.
Sure.
Which ordinance?
Tavis, can you include that in the packet?
Short-term
Yep, thank you.
language that was
The definition.
the warrant article that failed.
That was only a definition.
Correct.
We should start with that.
Can I just ask one question? It looks like the downtown grill is about to open, but the trash enclosures that Doug and I looked at as an emergency have not been installed. And I check it out every day when I walk by there. And
To every
I don't
extent
get that.
practicable, no certificate of occupancy will be granted, and the building will not be allowed to open until the planning board conditions are satisfied.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn? Roger?
So moved.
Seconded.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you.